This is America's Voice Live.
And welcome to America's Voice Live. I'm Steve Gruber.
The pulse of the people.
We need somebody that's going to hear the people's voice.
The truth the mainstream won't touch.
This guy is, by definition, a globalist.
And the stories that matter.
Rav's own Ben Berquam.
Right up over this hill. We got an armed cartel. I see him.
Live.
Breaking news right now here on Real America's Voice.
Unfiltered.
These people are domestic terrorists.
And unapologetic.
We're here to take a stand for God and country. Does feel good, doesn't it?
America's Voice Live starts now.
Welcome to America's Voice Live. I'm Steve Gruber. It is January the 26th in the year of our Lord 2026. As always, we appreciate you spending time with us here. Let's get right to the day's top stories. President Trump gave a stark warning to Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney relating to his recent electric vehicle negotiations with China in the form of leveraging a 100% tariff if Canada were to continue and move on such a deal. More on that coming up. Also, National School Choice Week has officially kicked off. This event is meant to empower parents as it relates to finding the most suitable school environment. An important choice for sure, especially since this event covers the formative years of kindergarten through 12th grade. And finally, we'll discuss Greenland and President Trump's assertions about a deal framework being in the works, along with Russia's surprising indifference to this development. All that coming your way. But first, we start here today. In Minneapolis, more chaos as another anti-ICE agitator is shot and killed by a Border Patrol officer trying to conduct a targeted enforcement effort to arrest a dangerous illegal alien who escaped, by the way. Let me tell you clearly and concisely today, one person who will not be shot by a Border Patrol officer ever. Me. Because like the vast majority of Americans, I understand the rules, but for anyone who still doesn't get it, let's go over them again slowly for those in the back. First and foremost, treat law enforcement officers or agents with respect. Whether it's local, state, or federal, treat them with respect. If they're actively working to arrest someone, do not interfere. Do not bum rush them, push them, spit on them, throw things at them. If you want to protest, do that. Bring your signs, your bullhorns, your whistles, fine. Scream and holler all you want, but do not engage directly with law enforcement efforts. And if you are given direct lawful orders, just follow them. 37-year-old Alex Preddy, a VA nurse, didn't follow these rules or listen to his parents, who say they told him weeks ago, do not engage with police. If he'd listened to his mom and dad, he'd be alive today. Instead, he was shot and killed during a scuffle with police over the weekend. And the lines are clear. Law enforcement on one side, agitators and anarchists on the other. I told you before, those antagonizing the agents want a Kent State moment. They're willing to get people killed if they think it will advance their agenda. Pretty selfish. Joining me to discuss is former Navy SEAL, FBI, and Secret Service agent Jonathan Gilliam, as well as conservative Caucus President Jim Pfaff. Jonathan, let me start with you. Tough situation. A lot of noise, a lot of chaos by design. These people are agitating, whistling, pulling cars in front of agents, and then grabbing agents and getting into a wrestling match in the street. And sadly, again, somebody gets killed. This needs to be brought under control. We need to have cooperation between the state of Minnesota, the Minneapolis Police Department, the state patrol there, and the federal agents. This isn't happening anywhere else but Minneapolis, and there's a reason for that, isn't it?
Yeah, there absolutely is. Let me just say one thing. I was never a Secret Service agent. Great job. I could have been, but I was in the FBI and a Navy SEAL. But with that, I understand the attacker-defender mindset. And you said two things in your opening there, Steve, that are really important for people to realize. One, this individual's parents told him weeks ago not to get involved. Okay, why did the parents feel the need to tell him that? Because probably most likely this guy has a history of getting involved with these leftist groups, or he was just a part of it and they knew it. That's a very important thing to take in mind, because also these groups are organized. These groups are funded. They're trained. And that was the other thing you were talking about. These groups are not just out there because they're Minnesotans and they don't like what's occurring there. There are some of those people. But as this signal controversy is happening with this signal group, it shows you how organized these people are. We've seen it before, same organizers. And that was the last thing that you point out, I think is very important part of this. is that they want a Kent State moment. And the people that are organizing these things are far above the people on the street. I have no doubt that this guy, the woman who was shot in her car, they are not the planners. They are the useful idiots that are brainwashed, and I think probably on some kind of narcotic, where they're going out there and they're doing these crazy things for people who have motivated them to do them. And those people who are doing the motivating and the planning and the funding, they don't care about these people's lives. They want chaos and anarchy because, as a good Marxist always says, by any means possible, they will get what they want, which is some kind of control or overall power. It has really little to do with some kind of synthesis, which Marx talked about, where there's a non-government utopia. They want chaos because they want power. And people like this on the street are breaking the law. They're not protesting, they're rioting. You could even call it soft rioting, where they're not necessarily like this individual, this guy. He was out there controlling the streets, controlling the traffic, telling people where to go, filming it so that he could instigate this while they obstructed justice. And so I think when you look at the totality of all the things you talked about, the reality is that the president needs to be sending DOJ and FBI out there to get to the bottom of who these people are, not just go after ICE and try to change tactics.
Well, Jim, I think Jonathan made a good point there. This is not activism. This is a pseudo-military operation. They've got signal accounts. They are well-funded. They've got warming tents and gear tents and food being delivered. This is not about signs and bullhorns. This is much more organized and very well-funded, as Jonathan said. Jim, what say you?
No, I absolutely agree. I think we have to be treating this as a criminal conspiracy. I think the Trump administration needs to be very serious about taking that on because, listen, there's money behind this. There's plenty of documentation of the people who are funding these organizations to help them coordinate these efforts. They are highly coordinated. They are well funded. They are, as Jonathan rightly said, utilizing useful idiots who are willing to believe this false idea that somehow you've got Gestapo troops going around doing whatever. That's not the case at all. This is very clear federal law being undertaken, being adjudicated by the Trump administration. And in fact, if Donald Trump were not doing with ICE what he's doing right now, he would be abrogating his responsibility as president of the United States, as his predecessor did for 4 years. So listen, when you have these sorts of situations, and when you look at the way that this is organized, the closest construct that we can come to in recent history is that this is very much like an insurgency effort, like we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, taking on American troops. And even though I opposed both of those wars, the reality is those guys were on the streets doing what they needed to do and what they were asked and tasked to do by their military leaders. And you have these insurgent operations with communications channels where they were keeping up with one another, telling people where the military, convoys were moving through the cities. And then they would bring out IEDs. They would set themselves up in positions to provide fire to take on American troops. That's an insurgency effort. This one is very violent. And it should be dealt with aggressively in exactly the way that Jonathan talked about. It may not go to precisely the violence that we saw in Basra, but at the same time, it's getting very close to that.
But it is what I said.
This is a really serious situation we got to deal with.
This is a pseudo-military operation. This is not activism. This is a pseudo-military operation. And for those on other networks that would suggest in any way this is not violent, these are not violent protesters. Well, another agent lost a finger over the weekend because it was bitten off by a protester. Last night, I saw a video, Jonathan, of a federal agent left alone after these anarchists had attacked a hotel where they thought ICE might be staying. The blood was streaming out of his face. There was blood everywhere. He was left alone by Minneapolis police, abandoned all by himself with agitators all the way around him. He did have a shotgun in his hand, and that kept him at bay. This is unacceptable, Jonathan. There is violence out there all the time. Biting off a finger. I hope that person goes to prison for a good long spell. The person that punched this federal agent in the face. It looked like he had a broken nose. I've been there before. That's the way it looked to me. Let's talk about that. The violence is real. And for anybody that dismisses it on other networks, they're not being honest, are they?
No, absolutely not. And I think this is very crucial because I have acquaintances that are on the ground there with ICE, that are in ICE, and they can't even go to their hotel and sleep because people are setting off fireworks. They have sirens and horns outside, things that would get you and I arrested on the street. It's not protected by the First Amendment. This is another issue that we have with law enforcement and officials, is that they have bastardized the First Amendment to make people believe they're protected, or they're giving them protection where it is really the Constitution doesn't protect them. So I think this is very crucial for the president to make sure that Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, whatever she does, that they, and also Kristi Noem and Tom Homan, that they remember that law enforcement, as usual, is not the way this should be looked at, because this is not a regular law enforcement issue. This is a criminal enterprise or a national security counterintelligence issue. And they need to look at this and investigate this the same way they would with any other criminal enterprise. You know, there's an article here from Time Magazine, February 4th of 2021. People should look this up. And it was the secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. Criminals love to brag about what they do. That's why people get caught in jail. I think that this article right here, if people go back and look at it, lays out how this leftist group funds and coordinates all these things. They talk directly about how they can have a protest, a rally, or a party anywhere in the country in 2 hours, fully funded and led by people on the ground.
That's right.
And they're leaving out riot because that's what this actually is.
If they get bored in Minneapolis, they'll just load their buses and go to the next stop. Except it's not happening anywhere else. And what we're seeing in Minneapolis is unique to Minneapolis. In the summer of 2020, it happened in some other places, but it was the worst in Minneapolis, Jim. It's happening again in Minneapolis. Bad governor, bad mayor, bad policies, bad outcome. Last word to you.
Yeah, without a doubt. And by the way, this is not a nationwide problem right now. This is happening only in areas where political leaders are encouraging this sort of violence. And let's just be straight up and fair here. Jacob Frey and Tim Walz are encouraging this behavior. They're doing very little to discourage it. I do hope that the call that President Trump had with Tim Walz was as he described, because maybe we can tamp this down. But unless you deal with the criminality that's involved with this, we will have this happening wherever these people are able, through the funding and coordination, to make it rise up. And their intent, it seems, upon following ICE around the country and making these demonstrations. While, by the way, the even more massive criminality, although less with violence, is taking place in Minnesota. Our national field director went to Ohio. We're seeing it in Maine and other places where all of this fraud is taking place. They're also doing this to cover up the very serious issue of tens of billions of dollars being directed through these government programs with our taxpayer money to give to groups who don't deserve it, which, by the way, much of that money, as we understand, is going to al-Shabaab over in Somalia. This is a serious, serious problem that has to be dealt with aggressively. And I've had people in D.C. and people that I talk to on campaigns trying to say, well, is this going to hurt us on the midterms? Listen, this is one of those things where you have to go break through it. You don't back off because it's tough. And Donald Trump's administration, particularly Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, need to deal with this aggressively, because we have to tamp it down on a criminality basis, or we're just going to see this over and over again.
Jonathan Gilliam, Jim Pfaff, thank you for being here today. I'm sure this story will still be in the headlines for days to come. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
You got it.
Greatly appreciate it. All right, still to come today, we'll have more here. After the break, Canada quietly opening a backdoor for China's auto industry with their new trade deal on EVs, 49,000 of them. But President Trump responded with a stern warning. Also, I'll take a look inside China's growing power struggle after President Xi orders a top general arrested Details straight ahead.
Real America's voice is growing, and now it's all in one place. Introducing the new and improved RAV app, built for access, community, and choice, not paywalls. Here's the key. RAV is still free to watch. No sign-in, no membership required. Your favorite live streams, breaking coverage, and video on demand are all right there. Free, just like always.
For the War Room Posse, we have to be a force multiplier on this. We have to stick the landing.
In the White House, in the Oval Office, you're crushing it, my friend.
And if you want more, the members section is your backstage pass. Get exclusive behind-the-scenes photos and videos, insider moments from the studio and the field, and early access to new content before it goes public. Members can also unlock special experiences like virtual meet and greets, member-only auctions, and select event access, plus commercial-free viewing of certain shows inside the app. It's not just an app, it's a community. Download the RAV app today. Find it in the App Store and Google Play.